Our chilling story begins in Western Russia in April of 2019, when a group of friends went on a picnic to celebrate the birthday of one of them. Most of them had just turned 18 and wanted to indulge in the temptations of grown-up life far away from judgmental parental eyes. In Russia, the legal drinking and smoking age is 18. Much to the delight of the group, who spent the day drinking, taking videos of each other, and just generally having a laugh. They had no idea the day would end in a horrible tragedy that would remain unsolved for many years. The main characters of today's story continue to stay silent or hide behind the backs of their influential parents, while the family of the young men who mysteriously died in the forest that day are striving for justice. Today we're filming in a forest, but not that exact one. Even though I'm Russian, I live in the Netherlands, and we're filming now in the Netherlands in Amsterdam's Bos. And also, if you're wondering where Archie is, he is right there behind the camera. He will say hi later and you will hear his voice. Don't worry. And we will figure out this situation for the next videos.
Smolensk is a fairly large city that is currently home to about 300,000 people. Located in the marshlands of western Russia and surrounded by forests, it is one of the oldest cities in the country. Its first written mention dating back as far as 863. There are many villages and small towns in the area around Smolensk. Our story takes place in one of them, the town of Demidov.
Vlad Bakhov, who will be the focus of today's story, was born on the 14th of September 2002 in a very ordinary family in Smolensk. His parents separated when Vlad was very young. By the age of 5, he already had a stepfather by the name of Ivan Fadeev, who would raise him with his mother. Vlad soon started calling both Ivan and his biological father Dad. The family was fairly tight-knit. A few years after his parents divorced, Vlad's mother gave birth to his younger brother, Christian. Even though the parents were separated, they managed to maintain a friendly relationship. Of course, Vlad's father harbored a certain dislike towards the stepdad, but it never became a big issue. The two men simply tried to avoid bumping into each other. Vlad became independent quite early on. Things first changed after Christian was born. He was a sickly infant and spent a long time in hospitals, undergoing as many as 8 complex surgeries in his first year of life. Vlad's mother, Anastasia, went to Moscow with the baby, leaving her eldest son with his stepfather. That was when the two became close, and Ivan started seeing Vlad as a son. Later on, Vlad had a cordial relationship with his younger brother, who followed Vlad around everywhere and loved him very much. Family and friends remember Vlad as a kind and fair person who was always ready to come to the aid of those in need. He stood up for the weaker, helped the younger, and treated elderly with respect. Of course, like any teenager, he could occasionally be difficult, but his parents knew that it would pass with age. My son was the kind of person who would listen to you and then still do things his way, just to make sure, Vlad's mother recalled. One time, Vlad stole money from his parents, but instead of getting something for himself, he bought some toy pistols and gave them away to other children, including his brother.
He would always defend the younger and stand up against injustice. Even if the bully was twice as big, Vlad would always step in saying, "Well, hit me first then."
Vlad's stepfather recounted. He helped everyone, be they an adult or child, family or not. He always stood up for people, his mother says. That's why he wanted to go to the military, to protect people. Vlad enjoyed quite a bit of success with the girls. When he was 16, he was supposed to enter the Alexander Nevsky Military Academy, but instead had to stay in school for another year due to poor grades.
It was all because of girls.
His stepfather recalls.
He was smart and handsome and would date 7 or 8 girls at a time. That's why he had to stay in school for another year.
At around the same time, Vlad's stepdad arranged a part-time job for him at a car wash. However, the young man soon stopped going to work. Ivan occasionally described his stepson as lazy and easily swayed, but that applies to many teenagers who do not yet know what they want from their life. In early 2019, Vlad had a big fight with his mother after having lied to her about attending school while actually spending the night at the homes of different girls. Anastasia slapped Vlad, and he ran away from home and stayed at a friend's place. From there, Vlad called his stepfather. He realized that he had been foolish, but refused to return home immediately.
I know I'm to blame here. That's what I'm like. I make all sorts of promises that I can't keep.
Vlad explained in repentance. That year, Vlad found quite a lot of new friends. His parents didn't particularly like these friends, believing they were to blame for Vlad skipping school and lying about his whereabouts. He would occasionally get into fights, usually over girls. That, however, was something he would often tell his family about. After talking to Ivan, Vlad returned home and promised that he would concentrate on studying. His finals were approaching, so he found a math tutor, started attending school every day and going to the local swimming pool. He also returned to his beloved wrestling classes. His relationship with his parents improved. He had a very trusting relationship with me and his grandmother. He began telling us about where he was and what he had been doing. As a mother, I knew everything about his experiences, his crushes and so on. We really became friends, Anastasia recalls.
On April 5, 2019, after his swimming class, Vlad went to Demidov, which is about 60 miles away from Smolensk, to visit his grandmother and his biological father. He spent the night at his grandmother's house, who was delighted at his arrival, and the next day he told her that he'd be going to a friend's birthday party and would be back at about 10 p.m. Beyond the town of Demidov begins a dense forest that borders a local national park. In this forest stand several half-abandoned villages inhabited either by the occasional country house dwellers or elderly people. It was at the edge of this forest that the party was to take place.
Vlad didn't tell his mother about the party, apparently deciding not to worry her, or being afraid that she would not let him go. His grandmother allowed him to go, but called Anastasia after he left to tell her of his plans. Anastasia was not angry. After all, she trusted Vlad and realized that her son was almost an adult. Besides, back in Smolensk, he constantly met up with friends and went to all sorts of parties. Vlad left his iPhone at his grandmother's house, saying it was broken, and took with him an older phone without a SIM card, planning to make use of Wi-Fi hotspots from the other people at the party. He also gave his grandmother the phone number of his friend Maxim Zhumaev, so that she could call him if anything happened. Vlad took a cab to the place of the party together with Maxim Zhumaev and Dmitry Yanchenkov. In the forest, they arrived at a small wooden hut, where all of the teenagers were to meet. Vlad was not a member of the group that had gathered that day, and most of the other teens were not directly acquainted with him. There were rumors that Vlad only went to the party because he liked the birthday boy's girlfriend, Daria, and wanted to get to know her better. As we have already learned, Vlad was very interested in girls, and some sources say he already knew Daria, so it seems quite likely that she was the reason he decided to join the party. It was a motley crowd that gathered that day in the clearing. Later on, they would be known as the 12 Friends, by the number of participants.
The birthday boy was Andrei Sidurin, the nephew of a former local politician, businessman, and generally influential person in Demidov. On the eve of the picnic, the young man had just turned 18, becoming an adult by Russian law. He was also the creator of a group chat for the 12 friends in the social network VK, Russian version of Facebook. Vlad was not invited to that chat, perhaps because most of the group didn't know him. Daria Durbanova, 18, was the birthday boy girlfriend and daughter of Viktor Durbanov, police officer and head of the local juvenile crime division. Stanislav Yaskin, 16, was the third to arrive at the party. Yaskin was the son of the head of the administration of the Tidovshenskoye settlement not far from Demidov, also a fairly high-ranking official by local standards. Alina Mironova, 18, was Yuskin's girlfriend and the cousin of another guest, Marina Kabuk. Her father is also a police officer. The fifth guest was the 16-year-old Sergei Konashenkov, son of a well-known businessman in the Smolensk region. The sixth was Daniil Kondryshkov, the 17-year-old son of a police officer in the Demidov district. Maxim Zhemaev, 17, was a good friend of Vlad's. Maxim and Vlad met in 2017 and quickly became close. It was from Zhemaev's phone that Vlad called his grandmother once during the party. Dmitry Yanshenkov, 18, was also a close friend of Vlad. Yanshenkov, unlike the others, didn't have rich or well-known parents. Even though his family was alive, he was brought up in an orphanage. Valery Slautin, 16, knew Vlad since he was 3 years old and was his closest friend in the group. The 10th guest was the 17-year-old Vasily Kondratiev. He was Konashenkov's cousin and came from a family of business people. Another guest, the 18-year-old Marina Kabuk, had not been acquainted with Vlad before the party. Last to arrive was the 17-year-old Kirill Bakramov, a classmate and friend of Daniil Kondryshkov. He and Vlad were closely acquainted.
At about 3 in the afternoon, Yanshenkov, Bakhov, and Zhemaev arrived at the clearing. Maria Kabuk, noticing a tall guy whom she hadn't seen before, asked who he was. "That's Cadet," the boys replied. That was Vlad's nickname because he was planning to go to military school. The other teenagers didn't really expect Bakhov to join them. Before that, he had been told that there were no seats in the cars that were supposed to drive them to the clearing, and he hadn't been added to the VK group chat. Nevertheless, he fit into the company, helped by the fact that it included a couple of his friends. The others also decided to give a chance to the teenager, whom, even if personally unacquainted, they would sometimes see in town when he came to visit his father or grandmother. Everything we know about the party was told by the guests. Let's just keep that in mind. At 3:20 p.m., the girls began setting the table. The company made a fire, lit up a hookah, and started grilling kebabs. The boys opened beers. Soon, someone called a cab, asking the driver to bring more alcohol. At around 4 p.m., the cab driver arrived, bringing another 5 liters or 1.3 gallons of beer. Later, during interrogation, the driver claimed that the teens were still sober and reasonable when he saw them. Sure, there was a lot of noise and laughter, but nothing outrageous. At about 5 p.m., another group of teens visited the party. They were also celebrating a birthday of a boy named Kirill Stolyarov, and the company was led by his friend, Stanislav Savetov. They had set up their spot just over a mile away from where Sidurin's party was taking place. These boys were well acquainted both with Sidurin himself and many of the others in his clique. Eyewitnesses later recalled that Vlad Bakhov, then still sober, asked Savetov to give him a lift to Smolensk the next day. Savetov agreed. After some time, Sidurin asked Savetov to leave, claiming that his girlfriend Daria didn't want to see Savetov for some reason. The second group left the clearing after spending around 30 minutes there, although later one of them will recall that they spent even less time there, 5 to 10 minutes. By that time, the meat was grilled, and the teens switched from beer to stronger drinks, vodka. Vlad, who had been practicing hand-to-hand combat, allegedly engaged in jocular fights with several of the boys, including Dmitry Yanshenkov and Kirill Bakramov. The vodka got to Vlad pretty quickly. A video from the party shows him grimy and barely standing on his feet, attempting to climb atop the hut. Several others are seen helping him, and they seem a little less drunk. They can at least stand. Let's take a closer look at the video. One of the teens took Vlad's phone, and this seems to be the reason why he's attempting to climb atop the hut. But just as he grabs onto someone's hand, they let him fall to the ground. It seems they're making fun of him. Vlad's parents suspected that someone had brought drugs to the party, pot or something heavier, exacerbating the effect of the alcohol. Perhaps Vlad makes vodka and some other strong substance to better blend into the company and seem braver. That video was shot between 5 and 6 p.m. Eyewitnesses claimed that Vlad had earlier tried to leave the party and take the road towards Demidov, but the others stopped him because they were afraid of letting him go alone in such a state. Soon afterwards, Vlad became sick. He was sitting on a bench, head in his hands, when Bahramov allegedly came over to help him. He took off Vlad's soiled sweatshirt, put it in his bag, helped Vlad to the nearest tree to relieve himself, and offered him cold water to wash his face. Maxim Zhumayev and Daria Derbanova also helped to bring Vlad to his senses. Vlad, however, wasn't the only one who overdid it with alcohol. Dmitry Yanchenkov also had too much to drink and even fell asleep at the table. From this point, however, the witnesses' accounts begin contradicting each other. Maybe it's the alcohol talking, but perhaps there are other reasons. Some claim that Vlad told Daria Derbanova that he was going for a leak and that she didn't notice in which direction he left. At the same time, Zhumayev and Kondrashov allegedly went into the forest, some say for 30 minutes, some say for an hour. At about 6:30 p.m., Valery Slautin reported that Vlad had gone beyond the small garbage dump not far from the clearing. After waiting a few more minutes, the teens began looking for Vlad. They went into the forest, but having reached the thick bushes, soon decided to turn back. Dusk was approaching, and they had to turn on the flashlights on their phones to continue the search. At first, they thought they would look for Vlad on their own, not wanting to anger adults and believing Vlad couldn't have gone far in his state. They split up and went in different directions. Soon, night fell. But still, the teens refused to raise the alarm. After a while, Daria Derbanova finally decided to call her father, a police officer, asking him to come over for a bit to help them clean up and pack. The truth, of course, was quite different. They still couldn't find Vlad. Dmitry Derbanov arrived just after 9 p.m., becoming the first adult on the scene. Soon, other parents showed up. Daria told her father that one of the guests, Vlad Bakhov, hadn't returned to the clearing after excusing himself to the bathroom. Some of the teens suggested that Vlad left the party and went to Demidov alone, either home or to a dance. At 9:30 p.m., a group of young people arrived at the House of Culture in Demidov, which hosted discos. But Vlad wasn't with them. Vlad's grandmother started calling Maxim Zhumayev, but his phone was turned off. At 10 p.m. she finally got through to him, but Maxim at first didn't tell her that Vlad was missing, saying instead that Vlad was likely still at the birthday party, while he had already returned home and gone to bed. It is alleged that Maxim was in fact continuing to search for Vlad with the other teens. At 11:30 p.m., Vlad's father, Andrei Bakhov, was informed that his son had disappeared.
Someone knocked on the window. I looked out. There was a police car and people standing around it. I went outside and asked what had happened. Derbanova, Slautin, and his mother were standing there. There were others behind them, but I didn't see who. Daria told me that they had been hanging out in the forest. Everything was fine, and at one point, Vlad went to relieve himself and no one saw him again. So they said.
Vlad disappeared at around 7 p.m. For hours, the teens searched for him on their own, losing precious time. The other group that was partying in the forest that day also learned about Vlad's disappearance and decided to help with the search. But when they arrived at the hut, there was nobody there. Finally, at about 2 a.m., the company allegedly left the clearing after turning on their car's high beam lights and honking into the night in the hope that Vlad would notice them and come out of the forest. The group cleaned up the party spot surprisingly quickly. It was as if there had been no party at all. Usually, after the weekend, there were always piles of garbage in the clearing. But now, there wasn't a single napkin or a cigarette butt left lying around, even though over a dozen people had been partying. The teenagers also took with them Vlad's backpack and only gave it back to the family 3 days later, with his soiled sweater already washed. At 8 a.m. on Sunday, Vlad's stepfather, Ivan, got a call from Anastasia. She informed him that Vlad was missing, and Ivan immediately left for Demidov, calling his boss to say that he wouldn't come into work that day. This was met with little understanding. What sort of a man goes to look for a kid that's not even his own? Many Russians believe that dealing with children is not a man's job, even if the children are his own. Caring for your wife's offspring from a previous marriage is widely frowned upon, with such children often being disparagingly referred to as trailers. These views, however, are less popular among the younger generation. Ivan had a close relationship with Vlad, so it's not a surprise he went looking for him. Ivan and Anastasia arrived at the clearing by noon. There, on a log, completely lost, sat Vlad's father, who had spent the night searching for his son.
We got out of the car and saw that everyone was just standing around. Cops, foresters, some random people.
Ivan recalls.
I asked them, "Why are you standing there?" We had to question the locals, and I became engaged. I'm generally an active and a goal-oriented person, and psychologically, Vlad is like a failed goal for me. I love him, and there's also this unsolved trauma in my head that I failed to reach my goal.
Ivan immediately became involved in the search. Together with a K9 unit, they combed the entire forest, but found no trace of Vlad. That day, Ivan and Andrei finally made peace with each other. Now they had a common goal: to find Vlad alive. The dogs walked in circles as if they had lost the scent, and finally lay down on the ground. This usually happens when the missing person has been taken away by car, but maybe the dogs simply didn't have enough to go on. They were given Vlad's pool slippers, and his scent on them may have been spoiled by traces of chlorine. In the evening, the Smolensk search and rescue team Salvar arrived on the spot. By that time, Andrei Bakhov had severe back pain, and Ivan's feet were covered in bloody blisters. The search continued the next day. Now, the men were joined by the rescue team as well as 80 volunteers from Demidov and nearby villages. Many wanted to help. Ivan bought himself a pair of thigh-high wading boots and went to check the irrigation canals that crisscrossed the forest. A week later, they asked for help from Moscow, and people from Lisa Alert, Russia's most famous search and rescue team, arrived. They used a drone to film the forest from the air and passed the footage to the investigators. Meanwhile, strange videos began appearing in online groups for locals, showing a group of teenagers abusing another teen who looked suspiciously like Vlad. These disturbing videos would get posted and then deleted in less than 30 minutes. A Smolensk vendor recalls watching a video on social network VK. She says she recognized Vlad, and he was heavily intoxicated. Some guy was holding a camera and filming himself. Vlad was sitting behind him on a log, covering his head with his hands. The boy with the camera tapped him on the shoulder, asking how he was. Vlad's face was wet. His t-shirt was wet. So was his hair. His eyes were red and looked like he'd been vomiting and crying. Then a blonde girl appeared, swearing heavily and remarking on how drunk Vlad was. On the 6th of April, the day Vlad went missing, the 10-year-old daughter of a Demidov resident saw a live stream from the nearby forest, which showed a group of teenage boys and girls urinating on somebody. The victim was later recognized as Vlad. It was daylight. There was this familiar blonde girl. The video showed her face as everybody was laughing. Vlad was standing on all fours on the ground. He was silent, and she was laughing. Another Demidov resident said she had seen a video of teenagers gleefully laughing about having urinated on Vlad. This footage also disappeared soon after being posted. It was dusky. There was a skinny teenager squatting next to a tree, covering his face with his hands, the woman recalled. A blonde girl was standing next to him saying, "So you want me to date you? Look at yourself. Look at who I am. And who you are." It remains a mystery who posted those videos, but many people in the small town had watched them. Some decided to keep it to themselves, while others, like the parents of the 10-year-old girl, considered the footage excessively violent and reported it to the police. But it wasn't just the videos. Disturbing photographs were also being circulated online. In one photo, he is already lying on the ground, face down, arm and leg pulled up. There are 3 big guys standing around, and you can see a hut behind them. I didn't get a closer look, because the picture frightened me. I got the impression that the boy was dead. I even said it out loud. Are they taking pictures of a corpse? I was scared and turned off my computer. Recalls a woman who saw one of those pictures. It too was soon deleted. The authorities opened a murder case, which is standard practice when someone, especially a minor, goes missing, since the Russian criminal code does not have an article relating to missing persons. Opening a murder case thus helps to maximize resources involved in the search.
We combed through all the houses in the surrounding villages. We would do that at night, after the rescue team left.
Vlad's stepfather recalls.
Sheds, ditches, abandoned houses, ditches, old yards. We checked everything. We imagined all sorts of things, like perhaps he had crawled into the yard of some old guy where there was no TV or cell phone service, and it was just lying there.
The family checked all the buildings within the radius of 25 kilometers or 15 miles from where Vlad was last seen. They also combed through the forest, but he was nowhere to be found. We dug the ground with our bare hands. We would cover 10 to 20 kilometers every day. We couldn't sleep, we couldn't eat, all we did was search. At first, I really hoped that Vlad just got lost. But then there came this feeling that was hard to describe. A feeling of fear. For the first few days I was afraid to find my son's body somewhere in the bushes or under a tree. Vlad's mother recounts. Soon, she started hearing about the strange videos posted online the day that Vlad went missing. We began to realize that the teens were hiding what had happened at the party. I wanted to chase away the thought that something bad had happened, but we came to understand that there was no way Vlad could have just gone away. He always came home. He knew his grandmother was waiting for him, and he never let her down. During this time, none of the teenagers who had been present at the party volunteered to help out with the search. The only exception was some acquaintance of Vlad's, who helped out for a bit, but soon left town to go to the army. Here is how Ivan remembers his interaction with the group.
They avoided me like the plague. They would tell me to piss off, but I would come back. I dug up CCTV footage and made lists of eyewitnesses. The investigators didn't take us seriously. One of them even joked during a search of Andrei's house that he might have Vlad buried somewhere. Everyone thought we were a joke. Why were we treated that way? Some people knew the truth and kept silent, and some thought there was no point in caring about some drunk boy who got lost in the woods, because he's nobody, just some kid.
Vlad's story soon found its way onto psychics forums. And psychics from all over the world swarmed the family, offering all sorts of versions of events. He was strangled by a girl after trying to force her into a physical relationship. When she realized that Vlad was dead, she dismembered him and buried him in the swamp. My cards have pointed to these coordinates. You have to dig in that corner over there. This was one fanciful version of many. After a while, the desperate family began listening to the psychics and inviting them to the Dimitrov, covering their travel and accommodation expenses, and looking in the places that they pointed to. Though these people were unhelpful in the search itself, they succeeded in drawing attention to the case of the missing boy. Some people who are familiar with David Paulides' work started suggesting that this disappearance can be one of the missing 411 cases. It fits David's criteria perfectly. The boy disappeared in the forest. There were people around him. Nobody saw where he went. Dogs couldn't trace him. It's as if he vanished without a trace. But wait until the end of the video and tell me in the comments. Could this be a missing 411 case, or did something different happen in this forest? At some point, the TV show Battle of the Psychics, the Russian take on psychic challenge shows, was planning to go to Investigative to investigate a cold case unrelated to Vlad's disappearance. Vlad's stepdad found out that the crew would be driven around by a local resident and asked him to fake a breakdown of the van, buying time for him and Anastasia to talk to several of the show's participants. The psychics, however, failed to provide any information as to Vlad's whereabouts, but they recommended that the family try to get on the show Let Them Talk. This talk show, inspired by Jerry Springer and Oprah Winfrey, is among the most famous on Russian TV, with millions of viewers. Its host, Andrei Malakhov, personally took Vlad Bakhov's case and brought it to national attention. Soon, people all over the country were protesting in support of the boy's family and demanding that the case be taken up by the Investigative Committee in Moscow, seeing as the investigation in Smolensk was stalling. Malakhov also paid for a new lawyer for the family and offered money in exchange for any information about Vlad's disappearance. Eventually, Moscow investigators got on the case in early 2020. On January 29th, Vlad's parents came to the capital to meet with those who were to handle their son's disappearance. On the same day, the Salvar rescue team and a group of volunteers resumed their search in the forest. By this point, everybody knew that they were searching for a dead body, but they at least hoped to find one. We don't know why they chose that day to go back into the forest, but much to everyone's surprise, volunteers stumbled upon moss-covered human bones less than a mile from where the party hut stood. In a nearby stream, they found a pair of white sneakers. They sent a picture to Ivan, who recognized them as belonging to Vlad. Vlad's mother learned that her son's body had been found while on the doorstep of the Investigative Committee's head office in Moscow. What a coincidence that the search team decided to go back to the forest on that very day, even though it was the middle of winter and the weather was unsuitable for a search operation. And yet, that was the day they made their spectacular find. Investigators arrived on the scene but behaved rather strangely. They didn't cordon off the spot where the body was found and only took away large bones, leaving smaller bones and other remains like fingernails in the forest. Vlad's parents had to collect them on their own and take them to the Investigative Committee. Another piece of evidence that the police failed to collect was Vlad's t-shirt, which was covered in reddish-brown stains and found under a nearby tree. The investigators violated all rules of conduct at a crime scene, failing to close it off from unauthorized personnel or carefully inspect the surroundings. Such an attitude seems strange, to say the least. We have seen that the case was being handled rather slowly and sloppily from the outset, as if nobody considered it important except for the family of the missing boy. This likely has to do with the fact that many teenagers at the party were children of high-ranking Smolensk and Demidov officials who wanted to hush up the case. And there are good reasons to be suspicious. The fact that the party spot was carefully tidied up and that Vlad's body was found many months later in a spot that volunteers combed through several times. One of them had even testified that no human remains had been found in that very place. Could that mean that the remains were planted there much later?
A DNA test done by the Investigative Committee in Smolensk confirmed that the remains belonged to Vlad Bakhov. His parents later found out that during all the months of the search, the Investigative Committee had access to aerial images showing the skinny pale body of a young man with his pants down. This image was found by triangulating the footage with the coordinates of where the skeleton was discovered, but it was of poor quality. The parents never officially received this footage, and it was said to have later disappeared from the committee's archives.
The family's heads were spinning from all of the suspicious coincidences. Not only was the body found under strange circumstances on the day Vlad's mother went to the Investigative Committee in Moscow, but there was also no hair or internal organs. Only 2 hairs were found on Vlad's skull, which is much less than would be expected from a body that had been in the woods for several months, if indeed it had been there for all that time. Riddled by doubts, Vlad's family continued their own investigation. At some point, Ivan lay down on the spot where the remains were found and had himself filmed from a drone in the same way that Vlad's body had been filmed. From this experiment, Ivan concluded that the remains should have looked very differently. Some suspect that the aerial footage was fake, that somebody placed a decoy on the spot where they would later place the actual remains. In 2020, the family also tried to trace Vlad's possible journey from the party spot to where he was found, walking that mile in clothes and shoes similar to what Vlad wore that day. They found that this was nearly impossible to accomplish, and it seems even less likely that an extremely drunk teenager could have managed it.
It was very hard to walk. Our shoes would constantly become untied, and this was while it was still light outside, and we could see where we were going. When we attempted to walk at night, we couldn't get more than 70 meters away from the hut. Even while sober, it was impossible to walk there. Branches would poke us in the eyes, our feet were constantly getting stuck somewhere and we would fall.
Ivan recalls. Some people believe that the cause of Vlad's death was simply hypothermia. That night, temperatures fell below freezing point, yet Vlad was only wearing a t-shirt. A coordinator from the Lisa Alert rescue team suggested that Vlad could have decided to run away from the teenagers who were bullying him and couldn't find his way back once he had sobered up. He lay down to have a bit of rest and never woke up again. However, evidence from the 12 teenagers' online chats goes against this version. After Vlad went missing, the group exchanged messages that were no less disturbing than the videos that had previously appeared in local online groups.
As we already know, on the day of the party there was another group of teenagers also celebrating a birthday nearby, and they were acquainted with some kids from Vlad's group. On April 26, 2019, 2 guys from the other party exchanged the following messages. Stas Sovetov, who like many others at both parties came from a well-off Smolensk family, wrote to his friend Kirill Stolarov, "Why did we kill him? I'm so sorry." Stolarov replied that they run the risk of catching flack and tried to turn Sovetov's words into a joke, but every joke has a grain of truth in it. Could the other kids have been to blame for whatever terrible thing had happened to Vlad that day?
Sovetov later reiterated to the police that the message was just a joke. The investigation into the matter went no further. Sergei Konashenkov, another kid from the ill-fated party, wrote to an acquaintance at some point.
"You're afraid I'm gonna go to jail for 8 years? I'm a minor. I didn't drink. I didn't kill him. He ran away on his own. They won't open a murder case until he's found dead. The only thing that can happen is if somebody gives false evidence and says that I'm guilty, that I was drunk and had a brawl with him. But nothing has been said against me. I didn't drink and I can prove it. That's why the police haven't troubled me so far. Everyone thinks we killed him. When leaving the precinct, I wanted to make a joke, like look for the body in the river. But I don't want to get charged with murder for a joke. The truth may not be to everyone's liking. They'll end up blaming me, saying that I supposedly killed Vlad. I'm sure they'll end up shifting the blame on somebody. What a grim death in the cold forest, in pitch darkness. Those who just left him there will pay for it. I now feel guilty that a person has died."
These are excerpts from the messages that Konashenkov wrote in late April. At the time, nobody knew that Vlad was dead, and everyone searching for him still hoped that he would be found alive. So how is it that Konashenkov mentions him being dead already? The teenagers also discussed ways of cheating on a polygraph test, which they were expected to undergo. We don't know whether the test was actually conducted or not. In the months that Vlad's family and the investigators spent searching for him, the other teens from the party graduated school entered university, some went to serve in the army. Daria Dirbanova, for example, is currently studying to be a prosecutor. None of them were charged with murder, and even the cause of Vlad's death hasn't been established. This, however, is not surprising. It's difficult to ascertain the cause of death when all you have is a skeleton, since the only visible signs of damage would be bone-deep cuts or fractures. As for Vlad's clothes, they were in perfect condition, as if they hadn't been lying around in the woods for 9 months. Both murder and death from hypothermia are plausible versions. A drunk teen could have easily got lost in the woods at dusk, but in this version it seems likely that he would have been found quickly, especially considering the testimony of the volunteer who had previously scoured the place where the remains would be later discovered. So, if his death didn't occur naturally, what happened? Could the teens be somehow involved in his death? Perhaps they went too far in their bullying, beating him up, or even stabbing him. And if his body wasn't in the woods for most of the search period, then where was it? Could adults have helped their children hide Vlad's body and put his bones back in the forest when they decided that the investigation had gone too far? It looks like Vlad Bakhov's death just might go unsolved. Perhaps one day somebody will confess, but until then, the exact cause of Vlad's death will remain a mystery. After an extensive examination of the remains, Vlad Bakhov was finally laid to rest, nearly 4 years after his death. Now, the parents finally have a grave that they can visit and talk to their son. But of course, nothing can bring Vlad back, and justice will be hard to find. On every anniversary of Vlad's death, people bring flowers to the hut where the ill-fated party took place. There also hangs a picture of him, handsome, young, full of life, and gone much too soon. Vlad's younger brother, Christian, had a hard time accepting that he had lost his sibling. For some time his parents told him that Vlad was doing military service on a submarine and couldn't call him. At some point, however, Christian became suspicious of the story and asked them to reveal the truth. "I haven't gotten over the death of my child, and I never will. But no matter my own state, I will do everything I can to ensure that those responsible are punished," says Vlad's mother. Today, the case is still officially under investigation, and some of the evidence in it remains classified. Perhaps one day somebody will find the decisive clue. Otherwise, Vlad Bakhov's story will turn into one of those cold cases that are only solved decades later, or never at all.